Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Talking Tradesman. Today, on a remote podcast, I have with me Chris Binch, who has his own podcast called the Old Paratrooper podcast. Chris, thank you very much for your time this evening, mate, to come on and have a chat with me. I know a little bit of your background. You've got an incredibly interesting story, which we're going to get into. But first of all, mate, thanks for coming on to talk, and let's talk.
Yeah, nice one, Paul. Thank you very much for having me on. I just want to say before we start, I have watched quite a few episodes of your podcast and some clips.
I appreciate
and
that,
stuff.
man.
And I really like what you're doing. And as I spoke to you on the phone, anyone that kind of is pushing positive mental health and is doing to get the messages out there has got my vote. I think it's brilliant what you're doing, Paul. So
appreciate that, mate. Thank you. I believe we're pretty much on the same journey here, really, aren't we? You're trying to do a very similar thing to what I'm trying to do with this podcast on your own. So, yeah, all credit to you, mate, as well. And, well done for all the work that you're doing trying to spread that message.
Nice one, mate. Thank you.
No, we're all good, man. We're all good. But today, this episode is you in reverse, really. You're normally sat sort of where I'm sat, as it were, but this time it's to get to know a little bit about yourself. So you're probably the best one to take that away then, Chris, really, as to, where your journey started. Obviously, just to mention to the listeners, you are an ex-paratrooper, but you've also done bodyguarding, anti-piracy work, and unlicensed heavyweight fighter. Was that correct?
Yeah. I did a bit of that for a number of years, and then obviously more recently, I'm kind of more recently for the last 12 years I've been a firefighter. So,
mate, that's a hell of a resume.
it's I've done a bit. I always say I've done quite a lot, more than some, not as much as others. So yeah, I've had a bit of a diverse kind of career set, as it were. Yeah, definitely.
Certainly not one for a quiet life, mate, by the sounds of things.
More so nowadays. But yeah, no, where it all kind of started. So I'm from Nottingham, place called Arnold in Nottingham. It's like a suburb of Nottinghamshire. You know it, yeah.
Yeah, I know it, mate. Yeah.
Growing up, it was a little bit. I'd say it was rough. It was on the edge of a place called Bestwood, and you may have heard of the crime gang that grew up around there and kind of ran. I think one of the brothers is in prison now for murder. So it had its issues. I had a good upbringing as far as my parents are absolutely lovely people. I never went without anything as a kid. My dad was a bus driver for 35 years, and my mum worked in a factory, good working class people. I was a bit of a kind of a little shit. I'm not going to lie. I'll probably come on to it later in the podcast, but unbeknown to me at that time, I had ADHD. I've only recently kind of figured that out in the last 4 or 5 years. And that explains a lot in the kind of path that I've taken over life and the way I do things, the way I think, the way I do. I was I got labelled as the naughty kid, as you do, because I was a bit disruptive, concentration span. I liked school, but I wasn't academic. I left school with no qualifications just because I was easily distracted. You've probably seen all the same old sketch with a lot of reports, easily distracted, tries hard.
I had that one.
Yeah, it's a kind of normal thing. There are a few bits I said to you off air there. There's a few bits that I've not really touched on. I've not addressed myself that I probably will need to address at some point. But while they don't affect me, I don't kind of want to open the box because I don't know where. If I can't put the lid back on it, then if that makes sense.
I understand that, mate. You've got to do that kind of work in a safe environment, haven't you? And probably on a podcast with somebody that you don't particularly know is not the space to do that initially, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. And, like I say, it'll be something that I will address in the future. But no, as far as kind of that sort of thing, I was, the problem being I got bullied a little bit, and I'm not going to go down the bullying sob story. It was a thing that happened in the 80s. It's a big deal now, and quite rightly so, but it was more common than not that someone at some point in their life gets some sort of bullying. I was no different to that. And it was about 14 or 15 when I discovered an ability that I was actually all right at fighting. Now, that's not necessarily a good or bad thing. It was just one of them things. So I filled in a few of the bullies, and I suppose I got a bit carried away with it and a bit big-headed. That's what happened. So I was never one that went out and found trouble, so to speak, but it found me. And I was involved in a lot of violence through my teens, scrapping in pubs and places in town, in Nottinghamshire. And that
Do you know what, Chris? It's with that kind of thing. So my son's 17, and I was having a conversation with him the other day and talking about how, because I turned 40 this year, so that's my age.
You look fantastic, pal. Fantastic.
I appreciate that, mate. Thank you. Filters. It's all filters. But yeah, mate, I was saying to him that, because to that generation now, that sounds really extreme. But in my generation, like when I was in my early 20s, that was normal. That was a normal night out. And I think it's worth highlighting that, you know, society back then was a bit different. So going out and fighting in your early teens and early 20s, maybe it was where I grew up as well. I didn't grow up myself in a particularly affluent area. But that kind of behaviour, that was like par for the course.
Oh, absolutely. It was just like the done thing when it was a bit of a running joke. You've not had a good night unless you'd been in some sort of altercation. And it just kind of happened. And more often than not, you know, after an altercation, you'd bump into that person and be like, remember that night we had that? And then you'd have a pint with them. It was just the way it was. But it kind of reached the pinnacle when I was sort of 16 and I was at some sort of party and I ended up getting involved with the wrong people from this Bestwood area, and I ended up quite badly assaulted in a big fight, and I ended up getting glassed in my face. I had 17 stitches, broken nose, fractured jaw, and a broken hand. So I kind of, my dad was a bit like, he went absolutely mental at me, and he was like, look, you need to book your ideas. So I've been arrested a couple of times for that sort of thing, but just cautions. And he was like, look, you either book your ideas up. He was quite a strict old school parent. He was like, look, you either do something with your life, like the armed forces, or I'm going to kind of kick you out. And I know it was probably an empty threat, but it certainly did the trick. So I'd been and done a week at 15 anyway with the Worcestershire Foresters that were Nottinghamshire's local regiment before they all amalgamated and stuff. And I did really, really well. I got best overall student out of like 80 students. So I kind of thought that was my calling. And I was always going to join the Worcestershire Foresters until sort of 2 days a day before I went down to the Army Careers Office with my best friend who has now gone on to be Special Forces and done all sorts of stuff. And he was like, why don't we join the Paras? And I was like, well, what do they do? And he was like, well, similar to the other units, they just jump out of aeroplanes. And I was like, well, that sounds awesome. I'm down with that. So there we are, signing on the dotted line, so to speak. A few weeks later, after doing 17 at this time. Yeah,
17, straight into the Paras.
Yeah, straight into the Paras, not really knowing what was going to hit me, and it hit me like a freight train. I'm not going to lie. And yeah, before I knew it, I was kind of turned up at Lichfield for basic training at 17 years of age. So interesting times.
How did you fight? Because I know it's pretty brutal. It's from what I've heard, Paras like training or passing out is second only to Special Forces. So how did you find the whole experience?
Well, I've always been the fitness side of things, because I'm a big lad. I've always been a big lad. I was about 90 kilo when I was 17, so I've always been big. Okay. So I'm not cut out for running. I used to enjoy running on my terms, my pace. And when you've got some 10 stone wet through corporal or 11 stone that's a runner beast in your, I used to find it really, really hard. Stick a bit of weight on my back with a Bergen and a backpack, and I'd be all right. But the discipline, believe it or not, because my old man ruled the house with a rod of iron, I always used to make the joke that it was easier in basic training, the discipline side, than it was with my old man, bless him. So, it was no real, I'd been taught all them life skills before, how to use a washing machine, how to iron by my mum, how to shave, when there was guys in basic training that were literally like no idea how to shave, never used an iron. So that sort of stuff was fine for me. The discipline, you did as you told, and everything else. But yeah, I went through training up until P Company, which is the selection process, sort of a week of physical tests to join. You have to pass that to move on and get your maroon berry and your cat badge and stuff. And yeah, I failed the first time. Completed P Company the full 5 days, and I failed. Stand up fail on the parade square. March off to the right hand side and stand on your own. And it's a horrible, horrible feeling. And I thought, well, I don't want to be here again. I had a niggling injuries without making excuses. Everybody had injuries, but I feel that and it didn't enable me to put my maximum effort in. Like I say, I completed it, but didn't accumulate enough points. So I went into like a back sort of holding platoon until the next P Company. And I did it too soon, still had too many niggles, and I failed again. So I failed a second time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I was on the verge of transferring. I haven't told a lot of people this, but I used to kind of hold the whole failing P Company as a bit of I used to be a little bit ashamed of it. But now I actually look back at it and people have spoke to and everything else. I'm actually really, really proud that, because there was a lot of people that said, wow, I'd only do that once because it's hard.
Yeah.
And I did it 3 times in 6 months. So,
wow.
And I ended up on the 3rd time, passed, and off to battalion. So, but obviously,
mate,
you do other stuff.
I mean, to me, that screams resilience, because to get that knocked back and get back up and keep going, like, to me, that says a lot more about your character than somebody that would pass it first time and just march on through. Because with things like those kind of extreme physical tests that you'll put through, I mean, obviously there's a lot of skill in terms of what you're taught, but some of it does come down to luck. Because if you pick up that injury, then, do you know what I mean? It is like, it's luck as to whether, I guess when I say it's luck, I mean from a point of staying healthy. Because if you do pick up an injury, you can be as fit as a fiddle, but you can pick up a knock to your joints. It's very easily done. So yeah, to keep going, mate, for 3 times, I mean, that already tells me a lot about your mindset at that point in time.
Well, yeah, you know what it screams to me, though? It just screams arthritis in my ankles. That's what it screams to me now. I'm not going to lie. My left ankle and the injuries I don't, because I always said it's sort of 20. The guys that came through training in the 20s sort of seem to find it a little bit easier because you're more developed. As a 17-year-old and a 16-year-old that some of the guys were on there, your body's not developed. And as much as I was a big bloke and quite like an early developer, so to speak, that's why I look so old now. You know what I mean? But no, like
as a day over 25, Chris. What are you saying?
I'll have to come on this podcast more often, mate. To be fair. So yeah, I've always said as a kind of younger, sort of not a young teenager, but a younger adult, it was probably a little bit more difficult because your body's not fully developed. They're throwing 35, 40-pound Bergens on your back, and then off and down hills and carrying stuff. It's going to take its toll. Whereas the older kind of guys found it a little bit because they're developed, So, it was an interesting time of ups and downs with if I was actually going to do it. My old man, I think my old man was the kind of, again, tough love. I think he said to me when I told him I was joining the Paras, he was like, "You'll never do that. You'll not be able to do it." And I now look back on that. And it was, he knew I was going to do it, but he also knew if he went, "Oh yeah, you'll smash that," I probably wouldn't have done it. He was like, typical. You've got kids, yeah?
Yeah, 2 kids, yeah.
Yeah, so anything that you tell them, they're like, "Yeah, whatever, Dad." And so I literally, it was like, he's saying I can't do it, I will prove him wrong. Do you know what I mean? So.
It's funny, isn't it, mate, how kids can be the same. I was having a conversation a few weeks ago with somebody who was saying that they'd got brothers and him and his brother are polar opposites. So what he was like you. So if you're told you can't do that, you're going to go at it, 200%. Whereas his brother, if you're told you can't do that, he'd be like, "Yeah, probably not." So
that's it.
You've either got that sort of like that gene, I don't know what it is, personality trait, whatever it might be. I'm in your camp. I'm the same. I hate being told I can't do something. So yeah, fair play, man. It's I think, to be honest, to go to the extent of what you did in terms of serving as a paratrooper, I think you've got to have that That's like, it's got to be a personality trait that I would say probably 100% of people that have done that job have got.
Yeah, no, you're probably right in that. And I speak to a lot of people on my podcast about kind of growing up, and the stories seem to be almost intertwined about kind of the background, kind of fighting, that ADHD thing. A lot of them do come from really troubled homes, whereas I didn't. I came from a really like loving family and everything else, but there was that kind of still that streak in me that was trouble, and the ADHD that resonates with a lot of guys that go into the military and probably the
Yeah.
building trade, as well. I think
Mate,
but
yeah, 100%. It's that segment of your life is such a common segment that I hear, which is that later diagnosed as ADHD, but as a kid, it's always to think they were the naughty kid, the kid that couldn't pay attention, and the kid that got marginalised by the education system as
yeah,
no good, won't amount to nothing. And unfortunately, even to this day, with the construction industry, that's what happens. If you don't fit into that narrow lane of academia and you're pushed out, it's the where you'll end up on a building site then.
yeah.
So unfortunately, mate, I'm not gonna drag you into the education conversation because I could probably talk to you for 2 hours just purely
No,
about that.
don't. I have
But
probably the same opinion, pal. It's not suited for everyone, and it's like
no,
such a what's the better word? It's just it suits a small minority of people, like you say, that kind of fit into that lane. But there are so many
yeah,
avenues. If they started teaching skills, because there are a lot of practical kids out there that if they teach certain building skills and first aid and stuff in schools, there'd be
yeah,
a lot of people with then practical mindset that would then go on and do that, but they don't. They're obsessed with, you've got we're doing religious education or geography, and you're like, well, what use is that to me in the future? Unless I'm going to be a vicar or I'm going to be a geography teacher. I'm probably being a bit kind
yeah.
of, with that, but yeah,
I don't think you are, Chris. I think you're along exactly the right lines, mate. You're very narrowly comfort. I mean, the whole thing is very unnatural. If you
yeah,
think about taking a child, particularly young lads who are maybe between the ages of 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and telling them to sit quietly in a classroom with 30 other kids for an hour, sit, don't move, read that book or pay attention to this teacher that has probably got zero charisma or personality, that is, for somebody who has got ADHD traits or the neurodivergency in that family, that's virtually impossible. And
absolutely.
then rather than look at that child and say, okay, so they're not fitting into that category very well right now, let's divert them over here where they're going to thrive. You get the naughty, disruptive, problem child label. Well, you did then. I think potentially the education system is maybe a little bit more aware, I guess, of how to help kids that have got ADHD now, certainly than back in my day or your day.
Yeah, no, I agree totally, and it is, and there is a lot more being done to kind of identify these things. And I've always said I'm not a big fan of labels, but if it helps you understand how your brain works, how you
100%.
think, and how you learn, then it can only be a good thing. And that's
Yeah,
kind of
perfectly said.
yeah, and also like
Let's pause there a moment to thank this episode's sponsors, Zinza. Have you heard of Zinza's Perma White? Perma White is tough, it's scrubbable, and it's the best mould-resistant finish to use in high-moisture areas like kitchens and bathrooms. We use this in our business all the time. It's designed to resist cracking, peeling, and blistering for up to 7 years, and it can be tinted to any RAL or NCS colour on the chart that you want at selected retailers. It's water-based, it's low odour, it's easy to work with, it's quick to recoat. What more could you want in a bathroom quality and kitchen quality emulsion? If you haven't already, go and check out Zinza's Perma White. Thank you to Zinza. Let's get back to the episode.
going back, I did try and stay on at school as well. I went into the sixth form. I didn't have the qualifications to do A levels, but it was like what was called GMVQs. Can you remember them?
Yeah,
Back in the
yeah.
day. So I did one of them in leisure and tourism just because I wanted to stay on in the sixth form and go to all the sixth form parties. To be honest, I'm not going to
Yeah.
lie. But I squandered a year. I did nothing. And in the end, the head of the sixth form pulled me into the office and he says, "What are you doing? Why are you here?" And I says, well, I'm leaving anyway to join the army, I think. And he just laughed at me. And it was the same sketch. He laughed at me. He was like, you'll never make it in the army. And he genuinely meant it. That wasn't tough love. So I was a bit like, okay, we'll see. And if it, the chances of him seeing, he's probably dead now anyway. But, it was kind of, it was just one of them. I was like, right, okay, we'll see. And off I went. And the rest is kind of history, really.
I mean, obviously you did get through and you got into the paras, mate. A couple of questions. How long did you serve in the Parachute Regiment?
So I did 7 years, 1997 to 2004.
Okay. And how many active tours were you involved in?
So I was I was lucky enough to be in a really busy period. So I did 6 operational tours, 3 of Northern Ireland.
Wow.
Sierra Leone when that kicked off in 2000, if you remember.
I remember vaguely. I mean, 2000. What would I have been? I'd have been 16 in 2000. So I was busy chasing footballs and girls.
Yeah, fair play, mate. Probably not remember much, and probably sipping on quite a bit of alcohol at 16 as well, like I say, back in the
Definitely
day.
so, mate. Yeah. Mad Dog 2020.
Oh God, yeah, don't. I think that still gives me nightmares now. I think I've been ill on that a few times. But no, I kind of was lucky enough to be in at a busy time. I'm always dead open about the tours I went on. I mean, there was a lot of potential on them. They were kind of, but they weren't like, and I don't want to take anything away from the guys that did the later Afghanistan tours in southern Helmland. I mean, the stuff that they seen and did is non-comparable to what I did. It was quiet tours, that I were on. I did Sierra Leone, which had a lot of potential. There was a lot of instances where it was going to go south. The threat was very real, but it never kind of really materialised. And then Macedonia was part of a weapon collection, disarming the rebels. And then I was lucky enough to be on the first ever tour of Afghanistan.
Oh, really?
After 9/11, 2000 and back end of 2001, one of the first sort of soldiers on the ground in Kabul.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
how was that? I mean, what was that experience like?
Yeah, it was, it was interesting. I just kind of recently got my own team as well. So I was like a lance corporal. So I had my own team. So I was patrolling around Kabul and the streets at night with my own team, navigating about. And it was like a good responsibility. It was a good tour for learning your kind of skills and stuff like that. There was standoffs with the Afghan police and Afghan army at night after curfew, where there's guns pointed. And I think our patrols were involved in an incident up at the tower where they kind of got opened up on and stuff like that. But there was definitely a potential for it. But it wasn't really until the later tours, the Herrick tours as they were, where I think this one was called Opfingal that we were on. And I've got a little plaque here that where I got from that. But the later tours became very kind of intense, and I was out by that point.
Right. I spoke to the former guest of ours, Andy Williams, and some of the stories that he was saying
as well.
Yeah, I mean his tales of his tour of that was Afghanistan, wasn't it? His final tour just sounded. I mean, to somebody that's never been in the forces, mate, it just sounded horrific to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but it's a weird one. You speak to these guys and they'll tell you that they're the best times they had in the military, most of them, because they've got you're out on patrol and then you're back. There's no social media. There's no nothing. You're back in the camp. You're swimming in. You're washing in a river. You're cooking your scoff, and then you're out on the next mission. And most of the guys that I spoke to were like, "Take me back there anytime."
Really?
Which it's they kind of, from what I've spoke to people, that it's the bit being back here that they struggle with, the everyday. And
I'll ask you about that because it's always struck me as a bit of a paradox, really, because from my point of view, I mean, speaking openly, mate, I can't think of anything worse than being somewhere where I thought I was going to get shot at. Like, the thought of that to me would invoke fear, anxiety. But then I never did what you did. I didn't go down that path. I didn't do the training. So it's a weird one for me because I guess you guys... You get trained to such a high level with what you do. There must be a craving to see action and, complete, I guess, what you've been trained to do. But at the same time, I would imagine that I would be praying it didn't happen. It's that whole, that's the saying about being a warrior in a garden rather than a gardener in a war. There's a saying about, I don't know, you've got to have heard that one, Chris, haven't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I don't know. It's weird. It's obviously at the time when the shit hits the fan, and I have been involved in quite a few incidents when on the next stage after the military. But it's weird. Obviously, you're shitting yourself at the time, and your adrenaline's coursing. But after, it's like that was amazing. I can only put it down to, it's like, obviously you're a kind of painter and decorator. You've trained to do that. You obviously enjoy it because that's what you've done for 20 odd years, as you said. You've enjoyed business and stuff. It's like training to do that and never getting out to put it into practice is the best way I can put it. So we were trained for we went through some of the hardest training that the British Army has to offer to not actually put them skills to the test in one shape or form. And I know it doesn't have to be like a full-on, like a war movie where everything else, but I mean the patrolling skills, the jumping out of planes, the kind of planning missions, that sort of stuff. And then it's just an added bonus that if you're involved in a contact, as it's commonly known in the forces, where you kind of involved in an incident with the enemy,
I can definitely understand the perspective that you're coming at. I mean, once you've done that training, are you that confident once you're trained as a British military paratrooper that you're going to be okay, essentially, because your training is so high level?
Yeah, I think you have that self-confidence and that self-belief that the training gives you. You've done that. But, kind of pretty much it's the person the left and the right of you, that brotherhood. And I always liken it, and this may sound a bit weird, but the Parachute Regiment's like a cult. It is like a cult. It's fear of letting the other people down. So the standards are driven by each other. So it becomes like you don't want to let them down. And the ethos and the drive, it's nothing I've ever encountered. And like I say, the old paratroopers, they have tattoos. I've got several that it's so... and I'm older now, and I look back, and my mindset's changed a little bit. I'm still very, very proud of that, but it's 20 odd years ago, but it's still, that shaped me as the person I am today. And I still hold them standards and values and the things that I learned back then to this day and I've took them to every career I've been in. The standards that I learned, and it's the people, the left and the right of you, and as a whole, as a fighting force. And the professionalism and the discipline that comes with the Parachute Regiment that kind of gives you that self-belief, so to speak.
Yeah, that's interesting, mate. That's interesting. I mean, you've said, so after you came back from your final tour in Afghan, you then left the military, would that be right? So you said you did 7 years. What brought about that decision for you?
Well, it's a bit of a weird one. I always saw myself, after it taking me kind of struggle to get in, I was like, right, this is me. I'm in now. I'm really, really proud. And then through various kind of connections that I had and people, obviously it's no secret that the kind of Parachute Regiment supplies quite a high number of members into the SAS. So kind of around that time, there's always guys going on selection for the SAS, left, right and centre. So a lot of them are friends of yours. And I knew some guys that were in and were like, there's going to be something coming. Obviously, the Iraq, I was on like a bit of a rear party for the Iraq tour because I was getting out when Iraq kicked off. And there were guys informing me and letting me know that my best friend, again, that he came out for a bit to do close protection and then he got back in and joined Special Forces himself. But he said, look, there's this kind of, and another guy in 2 Bar as well, he said to me, he says, look, there's this thing coming up called close protection in Iraq. It's going to be pop star money. It's going to be, ridiculous. And that sort of whole close protection bodyguard field was like a closed market and reserved for former Special Forces, SAS, SBS in the past, with the odd Parachute Regiment soldier and Royal Marine. But as a whole, it used to be, Billy Billingham talks about it quite a lot. He went on to the bodyguarding kind of circuit, the celebrity bodyguarding circuit. So it was difficult to get into that. And then this thing came with Iraq that opened the door for the paras initially and the Marines, ex-paras and ex-Marines, and then the whole of, ex-British soldiers as a whole. And that went on for years. And I was very, very lucky to kind of land a job at 24 years of age out in Iraq. Now, it didn't go exactly to plan, the first job I went to work with. So I went for an interview in London with this guy in Kensington, suited and booted. I was told to bring a bag because if I was successful, I was flying out that day. So I was a bit like, well, I must have got the job if I'm taking my bag down there. That's how I thought. So I went down and he says, look, I like your resume is really good, 6 operations tours. He says, but you're a bit young. He says, we don't tend to take people under 30 years of age. You're 24 sat here. And I was like, okay. I was like, well, he was like, and he went, just out of interest, who was any of your officers? Who was your OC in you know, in 2 Para? And I was like, well, the commanding officer commanding my company, D Company, was a bloke called Andy Charlton. And he were like, all right, okay. He says, I know Andy. I went to Sandhurst with him. He went, give me a minute. Went out the room, made a phone call to Andy, and then came back in. And he was like, yeah, he says, you're an absolutely top bloke. He says, I'd be stupid not to employ you. So, yeah, when kind of you're happy, there's your tickets, off you go, you know. Wow. So that was that. And then I was there a week, and I punched several times an Australian SAS trooper and got sacked. So, yeah. That went really well. So, yeah, Chris, not the proudest.
You've given me the shortest version. I want to hear a little bit a bit more meat on them bones. Talk me through how that happened.
So I went out to work for this company. I not mention any of the company names because a lot of them don't even exist now, so it probably wouldn't matter. But just for obvious reasons, I won't. But I went to work for this company in southern Iraq, near Basra, Shaiba Log Base, I believe it was called. And they had like a mixed bag. They had some British soldiers there of varying different units, some Australians and some South Africans. And straight away, it was kind of evident that there was a kind of click between the 3 groups and I've worked with German soldiers, German troops on exercises, some American forces before, but not in this sort of proximity. And the training team was run by some Australian special forces, SAS Australian, guys. And they were just dicks. Now, subsequently, I've worked with quite a few Australians. Absolutely sound. One of my team leaders on a future contract, a guy called Tom, absolutely amazing bloke. But these blokes, he kind of briefed us. We were going out onto a range to do some training, because you do like a bit of a training package with a lot of these companies, where they take you out, do some shooting and stuff like that. And he briefed us to start with, and he stood on top of like a Ford Ranger with a shemag on and sunglasses with like a pistol holstered and a weapon. And my bell end radar literally went into overdrive. And I was like, yeah, this guy looks like a dick. Bearing in mind, I'm still a bit hot-headed. When you joined the Paras, I thought it calmed me down. It didn't. I was involved in all sorts of punch-ups in town with other regiments and stuff like that. So I was quite hot-headed. I'm not anymore. I'm the most mellow person in the world now. But back then I was kind of hot-headed, probably deep-rooted, all sorts of stuff. So, we had a bit of a disagreement, and they were bullies. They tried to bully us. They tried to do this, not in the sense of bullying like schoolyard stuff, but the way they were talking to us and everything else. And long story short, they did something out on the ground that you never do in the British Army. They called a contact as a drill without warning us on the way back for some Rangers. So they made out that for the viewers and the audience that probably don't know the terminology, basically they initiated as if we'd been attacked by insurgents, but without telling us. So we were all like in the vehicle, cocking weapons and ready to, and when we got back, he was like, I was just messing with you just to see how you react. And that is a massive no-go. In the British Army, you don't call contact unless it's a real incident. So things kicked off, and I ended up getting in an altercation with a guy called Tony, and ended up punching him a few times. And I did actually, when I told this story on another podcast, one of the lads that were there reminded me of the details, which I'd forgot. Again, true story. And he says, obviously, I've punched him several times and we're rolling around the floor. And as we're rolling around the floor, a grenade fell out on my chest rig and rolled across the floor with a pin in it. with a pin
Yeah.
in. He reminded me of that. I totally forgot that. And I was like, oh, shit, yeah, I forgot about that bit. So, yeah, he lives in New Zealand now, the lad that reminded me
Fucking
about it.
hell.
He messaged me and said, I've just seen your podcast. And why didn't you mention about the grenade? I was like, because I fucking forgot. That's why.
That's a key detail, that is, Chris, to be fair, isn't
Isn't
it? I
it?
mean, having a pin
Yeah.
in is quite a key detail as well.
But it's
But
important. Yeah,
still,
definitely.
yeah, it's not normally the kind of thing that you've got in your pockets when you have a scrap, is it?
Not really, no. So yeah, that was my introduction to working in the close protection industry. I kind of subsequently, I didn't actually get sacked. I resigned before they had a chance to sack me. I was like, I'm not working with them dickheads. I got backed up by a lot of the lads. They were like, they're idiots, and lads left and pretty much straight after that because of the idiots. And I think they got sacked. The lad that actually I had a set to have got binned for bullying later on down the line.
Okay.
So I don't feel too guilty for it. He was a dick. Yeah, so I kind of went out, and that put a little bit of a black mark against my name. So I was finding it a bit difficult to, obviously I was going to find it difficult to get out there. Once you do something like that, people don't want to employ you. So I actually went into a bit of I wouldn't say building trade as such, but I kind of did a bit of ground working.
Tough work.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly this time of year as well, it was tough work. I found it enjoyable because it was challenging working in some of the conditions. Obviously, with ground workers, they tend to go in pre everything, don't they? Laying footings, putting drainage in. So sites tend to be complete shitholes, and you're all mudded up. And I kind of I liked it, but it was not going to be my calling. I didn't have that much of an interest in it. So I tried to be a prison officer. I was a prison officer for 12 weeks at a prison in Nottingham, and realised that wasn't for me either, just dealing with the people that you have to. And I hats off to anyone that's works as a prison officer, because it's constant. It's just constant people on at you. Believe it or not, I'm not really a confrontational person. I deal with confrontation. I try and avoid it, or I'm a million miles an hour and being, like I say, I'm more mellow now, but that's how I used to deal with it. It was like, I'll shy away, and then I'll just see red mist, and that's that. But so the prison was probably the wrong environment when you've got prisoners in your face trying to provoke a reaction. And he was a guy. He wasn't a particularly nice guy. He was from Liverpool. He was in for not a very nice crime at all. In my face, sort of slavering and spitting and gobbing off at me. And I weighed him up for a headbutt. I literally weighed him up for a headbutt. I was like, I'm going to headbutt you. The red mist come down, and I thought, I need to leave this job, or I'm going to end up in here with him. So I decided to leave, and I ended up getting back out to Iraq with a company, and then sort of cracked on from there with another company. So. Yeah.
So just I guess for a bit of background and history, really, the call for the bodyguarding in Iraq, was that timescale wise? Was that around about the same time that there was essentially the war going on, or was this after that?
It was a kind of immediately after the 2003 war.
Right.
The kind of the US government went in. Don't even get me talking on the reasonings behind war now, looking back, but the US government went in and were responsible for the restructuring and rebuilding.
So it was like the rebuild.
Yeah, the rebuild. So basically, you were looking at tradesmen were going out, foremans, and they'd have kind of local nationals. They were managing local nationals, and my job was to protect, as well as the teams, the kind of the tradesmen going out to these sites, because they were a kidnap risk.
Right.
Obviously, you probably famously, there's a few stories that you've probably seen over the years where some people were kidnapped and sadly, paraded on the internet and done horrible things to. So our job was to kind of protect them and escort them round, and it was just a big cry out. They couldn't get the numbers to do it. The money was just ridiculous at the time because of the nature of just being able to throw a lot of money at it. The US government were throwing a lot of money at it. So security companies were going in and commending £80,000-90,000, a year for security operators. And a lot of it was tax free as well. So, for me at 24 being on that sort of money, it's like pop star wages,
Yeah. Yeah. And how long did you do that, Chris?
So I did it for 6 years from on and off. I bounced back to the UK.
Wow.
Because if you spend too long out there, it can become a bit much because it is busy. There is quite a lot of attacks. I was out there 2006 when that was predominantly a really, really bad year. 2006, 2007, a lot of deaths. But yeah, so I worked for three companies if I don't include the one that I lasted a week with. So I went out with a company, and I was probably one of the first guys on the ground with that company, helped set it up. Now, Route Irish, this is one of them stories I was on about that sounds a bit ridiculous, but it's true. You've got Route Irish, which is the kind of road into the green zone that runs to Baghdad International Airport, deemed probably the most dangerous stretch of road. There's been countless videos of US soldiers being attacked on it. Just literally one straight road, attacked housing, like sort of buildings either side, perfect opportunities for ambushes and that. And when I set up this company, I was driving up and down it in a soft skin vehicle, like a Ford Mondeo, with a shemag on and a beard, pretending to be a local, maybe 4 or 5 times a day. And at one stage, the US military wouldn't go on it. Yeah, I'm driving up it in a Ford Mondeo, which I thought was brilliant at the time, as you can imagine. Looking back, I'm a bit like, why did I do this? But it seemed like fun, and the whole idea of low profile PSD, private security detail, was a bit of a new thing. So they were trying to put you in a normal car, have you shemagged up, like have the the local headdress with a beard, and kind of almost blend in a little bit, instead of doing the whole 4x4 horns honking, lights flashing, trying to get through traffic. Almost highlighting yourself as a security team, trying to blend in with the traffic and just make out tinted windows. So it kind of worked, and then it went to armoured vehicles. I was responsible for quite a lot of training of local nationals that were going to come in, the better ones that were the ex sort of Iraqi army, then went on to work in the CP teams alongside the Brits and other nations. And the ones that weren't army were like a guard force. So we were just training them in weapons and first aid and things like that at a villa in the green zone. And it was dead good. We had free runner stuff while running up and down to buy out, picking up vehicles, picking up weapons and bits of. And then we later on in that contract, we went on and sort of did contracts all over Iraq for tradesmen as their CP teams and stuff like that. But there's a good incident. So we used to have to sign them in to the green zone. So you would have an outer checkpoint and an inner checkpoint into the green zone. The inner one was always manned by US soldiers. The outer one was manned by local national Iraqi troops. Now, every single day, someone from like our company, bearing in mind there was only like 5 or 6 on the ground at this company at the start because it was brand new. On this particular day, it was my turn to go and sign in the local nationals. Now, you always sign them in because obviously they're not really vetted. They don't have the correct paperwork like someone that's a diplomat or whatnot. You'd have to sign them in at the outer checkpoint where the Iraqi army are manning it. On this particular day, when I got to the checkpoint, the 18 of them had been let in to the inner checkpoint. And as I was signing them off, a massive car bomb, vehicle-borne IED, went off at the outer checkpoint 50 metres away. Force of the explosion blows off a feet, killed 17 people. And on any ordinary day, I'd have been there signing them in, and I'd have certainly been badly injured or lost my life. So I was just this story, this kind of whole being in the wrong place at the right time or vice versa has continued throughout where I've changed drivers or I've changed this. I'm just on the spur of the moment, and then that vehicle's got blown up. That's happened loads, and it's even gone on into the fire service now as well with stuff, which I'll come on to later. But so it's someone I believe is looking down on me, and I've had a few of my 9 lives, I'd like to say.
So during your time doing the bodyguarding work, you had quite a few close calls.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I kind of worked for that company all over, sort of mainly central sort of Baghdad and districts around there, for maybe 18 months with that company, I believe. And then I came home for a bit, and then I went out with another company on convoys. Again, convoys is just lethal. for any military personnel or for the audience, again, the most dangerous place you can be in any of these, especially in Iraq at the time, was on the road, because you're very vulnerable out on the roads. You're in areas where people can attack you and stuff. And so convoys is running convoys of trucks with equipment, 4-gun trucks, so Ford F-350s, armoured up, and you escort maybe 30, 40 lorries up from the border at Qasr in kind of southern Iraq up to Baghdad. It takes about 2 or 3 days. Make sure they don't get attacked. And that's probably one of the, you used to run an alleyway. It's called EFP Alley, where they had numerous EFPs, like a shaped charge that will pierce armour. It will go through a tank. And they used to set these off at the side of the road and stuff. So we were running this gauntlet sort of every couple of 2 or 3 days, taking
so you got a massive target on your back while you're doing that.
Oh, absolutely. We've pulled into camps before, and once we've been shot at and had rounds fired at us, and it happens quite a lot. So you just crack on through. You're in an armored vehicle. You don't kind of react too much to it, and then there's been reports of a team that were in front of us. They pulled into a camp after they'd been shot at, and the actual local national gunner in the back in the turret had been shot through the head. And when they arrived, he was dead in the back. So it was a bonkers. It was lawless. Absolutely.
What was the objective of the people that were attacking you? Was that just to try and kidnap people, or just to do damage? Like, was it just chaos, or?
It's hard to say. It was chaos. I don't think there was. I think it was hardline extremists. A lot of it that were against the invasion of Iraq by the Americans. Which, look, I get it. It's their country. But again, everyone that kind of went there, we believe we were doing good. Looking back now, it's with knowing what we know about the governments and what's gone off over the, it's a little bit difficult and different way of thinking about it. But every soldier or anyone that was on those close protection contracts believed they were doing good, and that's what I always say to people. It's like, when you're with the military, you don't go through to that place with choice. You're sent there by a government, but you still believe you're doing the right thing, because you think, well, the government wants to do the right thing, so to speak. So yeah, I don't know. I think it was a bit of everything. It was just lawless. There was obviously the kidnap threat, because they thought that the people would pay, obviously, the ransoms, and they were commanding large amounts of money. So yeah, it was a pretty bonkers time on the convoys. I kind of moved on from there, and in between working on convoys, I came home and I went backpacking around the world for about 7 months.
How, out of interest, mate, 'cause this one always intrigues me with lads from the forces. How did you find that transition? Because to me, I'll just say, forgive any ignorance here, Chris, with the way that I term this, but the way I see it as an outsider is that the British military, essentially, they get you, they shape you, and they turn you into a fighting machine who is trained essentially to protect themselves, and if they have to kill others under instruction to do so. But then at the end of your service, you're expected to just morph back into like civilian life. How is that transition? Because to me, it's almost like, how can I put it? If you were to train a German Shepherd to be an attack dog, which they do get trained to be, you would never take that attack dog and just release it into the local park. But I feel like that's what happens in the military. Do you know what I mean?
No, absolutely, pal. And back then, there wasn't. So the guys that went to Afghan and stuff, they came back from the Afghan tour, and 24 hours later, they were in a pub on the piss.
Yeah, that is mind blowing to me.
Absolutely, and they got it wrong for a lot of years. I believe I'm a bit out of touch with the military, so like I say, I've been out over 20 years now. Well, yeah, over 20 years, and it's. I don't know now, but I still know a few people that are serving, or friends of friends that are serving, and I think it's got a lot better. They do a lot more with decompression. Obviously, the understanding of mental health and stuff, but you're quite rightly so. You're 1 minute you're fighting an enemy where you need to be aggressive, hard, fast, and aggressive. It's sort of ingrained into you. Inbred? No, I didn't mean that. Ingrained into you. That's a different thing. Ingrained into you to be this, like you say. And then you're expected to switch off when you come back, and that's probably why. What was that? So mortar alarm
Something in
going
the
off.
background here, mate. I've no idea what that noise was. It sounded like
Sound
a
like a
train.
flute.
Yeah, I'm possibly, man. I'm on the high street, so it could be somebody walking past doing anything.
So yeah, it was it's difficult to, and that's probably the explanation of why a lot of soldiers get involved in kind of fighting when they're back, because how do
Yeah.
you then switch off from it? Quite rightly so, but I do believe they've got a lot better with it. But so yeah, for me, I don't know. I don't know. I've never found that side of it strange. I came off that contract, which was dodgy, and stuff happened, and then I were backpacking around the world for 7 months, and I never had the problem with the transition. It was just, I was
Were
fine with
you
it.
able to just like compartmentalize what you'd been through and just put it to bed?
Yeah, but I've always seen the stuff that I've done as experiences and exciting. I always, and that's probably why I did leave the military, because I never wanted to be someone that did. I did initially, but then when I thought about it, I thought spending 22 years in the army, you become institutionalized, and maybe I wanted different experiences, and I'm so glad that I've done it the way I have. Where I've done bits and stints, because I believe that's, again, it's maybe the person I am today, But yeah, I was lucky enough to be able to switch off and just crack on. And then as soon as I got back from backpacking around the world, I landed on sent my CV off as I was probably the last sort of few weeks of traveling, and they were like, "Yep." I think I got back in November, and they were like, "Right, contracts to start the new year, January. Do you want it?" And I was like, "Yep, I'll take it." Went out, and yeah, off I went on another contract. Now, this contract is crazy. It's a well-known close protection company. They had one contract called Op Matrix, I believe it was called, and then they had a very, very small one-team contract called Op Tourist. At the time, it was called nicknamed Op Tourniquet. So that should have set alarm bells off in the first place when it's called Op Tourniquet. But I was like, I had a mate who was on it, and he says, "Man, it's exciting. We do this, we do that." And I was like, "Okay, I'll put my name forward." So I went on that contract. Now, what it was so we worked for US intelligence. We were subcontracted to US intelligence, and we were put in 3 armored Land Cruisers. One of the armored Land Cruisers had a guy in the back monitoring a laptop with a camera on top, and it's like a 360 camera, so a bit like Google Earth.
Okay.
So you've got satellite views of above, but the US intelligence wanted real-time footage like Google Earth. So when they're planning ops and stuff like that, they've got real, kind of clear images. So we drove around every single street and road in Baghdad. There isn't anywhere, pretty much. I've been everywhere in Baghdad, places that Westerners probably have never been, at 30 mile an hour, waiting to get smashed. And you know what?
Yeah.
For a few weeks of it, we were like, I can't understand why we've not been hit yet. And then, sure as eggs, Boxing Day, 2000 and I want to say 2009. I think. I think it was 2009. Yeah, it must have. No, maybe 2010. Anyway, I digress. We kind of were out on this, and I've just been chatting to the guy today, ironically, that was involved in this incident with me. He was sat side. I was driving the third Land Cruiser. He was the commander, and he drops his camera at the time we got hit and hit record. So I've got the whole recorded. It went on for maybe 3 or 4 minutes, but it felt like a lot longer, of us getting hit. So basically, we pulled a place called Gazalia, which is a suburb of Baghdad. Pulled round on Boxing Day, and I literally looked at him, and no sooner had I gone, I went, "Seems a bit quiet round here," and then all hell broke loose. We got absolute complex ambush. Our vehicle got struck numerous times by rounds. It was an armoured Land Cruiser, so they never penetrated. My rear gunner, Matt, bless him, that was in my truck, he killed 3 insurgents that popped out and fired immediately on the back. And then they started traversing across rooftops and firing down on us. And this went on for, like I say, a couple of minutes, maybe 3 minutes, but it felt like a long wire of it exchanging fire, vehicles getting hit. And then we managed to drive out of it. I drove our wagon out of it, nearly rolled it on a corner trying to get out of the almost the kill zone. So they'd obviously pinpointed they did that a lot. They pinpoint the third vehicle, so there's nothing sort of behind it. You know what I mean? It's like an easy target. It's one on the end. You know, they run the risk. They hope that the other vehicles fuck off and leave this vehicle, and then it's fair game. And we just got smashed. As I was trying to drive out of the kill zone because I was expecting an RPG at any point. I nearly rolled it, the Land Cruiser on a corner, literally two-wheeled it, and then managed to keep it under control. And then we drove out of the area, and then it was. And that was just one of a few on that contract. And we look back now, I was chatting to the lad, like I say today, and we were like, how did we come out of that unscathed? You know, it was just absolutely bonkers for a period of time.
So unlike an armoured Land Cruiser, is that like obviously armoured plated glass as well?
They usually armour, so the glass is really, really thick. And I have got pictures of the damage that the Land Cruiser took. And I don't know off the top of my head how many rounds. These were sort of 7.62 AK-47 rounds. And it had numerous hits on the glass and it hadn't penetrated. So, you know, it does a good job. They will take a decent size IED as well, but it's not nice.
Glad to hear that, Chris, to be fair.
It's something you want to hear. And I have been IED'd a couple of times, and that's not a nice experience because my hearing's pretty knackered in my left ear. I've got the mute sign tattooed behind my left ear because I'm deaf in my left ear.
Shit.
And that's a bit because of like pressure of IEDs when it builds up.
When you say, because the thing is, mate, from a military background, you say these terms so commonplace, like, and you're saying, I've been IED'd a couple of times. To me, like the way you say it is like, I've stubbed my toe a couple of times. Do you know what I mean? But you're talking about being blown up, mate. So and IED, are we talking about while you're in a vehicle?
Yes.
So you've gone over an IED in a vehicle or next to an IED?
Well, there's so many different variants. They have pressure plate IEDs. You know, they have IEDs that are camouflaged at the side of the road. And the ones that I were hit, if you hit some of these pressure plate IEDs, they will send your vehicle into the air, and they can be really, really nasty, cause a lot of dramas. Sadly, I have lost a few friends that have driven over them in soft skin vehicles as well, and it doesn't bear thinking about, to be honest. And but I was in. Luckily enough, they were ones that were kind of located at the side of the road, and just they do cause a lot of damage, but the vehicle's generally still drivable, and certainly was on a couple of occasions for me. So I was able to drive out of the ringing ears. You know, I was really lucky again on a couple of occasions. I think one occasion no ear defence, but the second occasion that was a bigger idea. I had some pretty much like these. They're called Peltors. I don't know if you have the similar sort of thing in the building trade, but they're battery operated and they amplify normal noise. So everything's really, really clear, but they have the ability to block out blunt sort of, you know, trauma noise like explosions to protect your hearing, because you end up with perforated this eardrum before due to, you know, bits and bobs. So, yeah, it's, again, a lot of people do. I make the IED sound a lot worse than what they are. They're varying different sizes.
I don't think you do, mate. I don't think you do. I really don't. Listen, whichever way, shape or form you look at it, mate, somebody tried to blow you up. You can't make that sound worse than it is.
Yeah, well, yeah, I suppose when you look at it like that. But what I take it from the perspective of the people that I know that have worked out there that have had massive kind of explosions, and mine seem kind of almost trivial in comparison to what some of the lads I know have faced. So that's why I kind of, you know, I don't play it down, but it's a bit like I've like I say, I've done more than some, but not as much as a lot of the other lads that spend.
I understand, mate. Yeah, you're the world that you live in and have lived in, and your social circle and the people that you speak to. You know, you guys will compare your stories, and they will, I guess, rank amongst yourselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
To somebody outside of your industry, that sounds utterly horrific. Like, because I don't understand, mate, and I make up 98% of the population that aren't going to understand. IED just means somebody tried to blow you up to me. Now, I can compute that big bomb, little bomb, you know, more risk of death, less risk of death. But either way, it's still like somebody still tried to blow you up, mate. That's pretty fucking bad.
Yeah, it is. It is when you look, and like you'll probably relate to this because we're not too dissimilar. I mean, I'm 44 now, but I look back and I can't picture myself doing that sort of stuff now. I mean, I weigh up a 3-foot wall, and I think if I jump off that, am I going to hurt myself? So you
Mate,
know
I
where I'm
laugh because
coming from.
I laugh because I get it. I get it. Yeah.
So looking back about what I did in my 20s and then on to my early 30s and stuff, I'm a bit like Jesus. And how I got away with it as well. I'm very, very lucky because there are, again, lots of lads that have sadly lost their life and also suffered life-changing injuries in that industry. And when you look back, I know the money was good, but it was never worth losing a leg or, being
No.
severely disabled or certainly your life. So, but very blasé in your 20s, aren't you? You just think you're invincible. You think it's not going to happen to you. So in all walks of life,
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, you're dead right, mate. And that's again, I think our generation was a bit different. But you do feel like you're invincible, and things like that culture of going out, partying, fighting, and all the risks that were associated back then. I think it was definitely a different generation, shall we say?
Yeah, definitely. And I think we're probably one of the last generations that still did the whole climbing up trees, and I mean big trees and hanging off branches at stupid heights,
Yeah,
BMXs, skateboards, and it's changing times. I'm not saying it's wrong or right, but I'm very, very. I grew up through the '90s, the Britpop era, Oasis, Blur. I have fond memories, and it's funny actually because my lad's 14 now, and he's massively into Oasis, and it's like history repeating itself.
that's cool.
It is. It's good to see. But no, yeah, we are kind of, I think, the last generation. And I think that childhood maybe sort of helped going into the kind of things that I did and sort of, made it a bit easier, maybe, if that makes sense.
I think one of the things about us as humans is we do adapt very quickly. Now, I've never done obviously anything that even compares to what you've done, but as I mentioned to you pre-record, I did spend a period of my life where I worked as a bailiff, and I used to put myself in some really ropey
Yeah, I
situations,
bet. Yeah.
situations where I look back now. Funnily enough, actually, when I did that job for a while, I was training other people, and one of the lads that came into me and did some training with me was ex armed forces. He was in the Pathfinders.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, brilliant
Yeah.
unit. Yeah.
So he came from that background, and he had done close protection, and came to work as a bailiff because he essentially didn't want to work away. Doing the tours and the
Yeah.
working in Iraq and close protection, that similar possibly to what you did.
Yeah.
But he really struggled to get on with the job that we did as a bailiff, primarily not because he was fearful at all, but that not knowing every door you knock, you don't know whether it was going to be friendly or whether it was going to kick off. He
Yeah.
really struggled to, I think, being on that state of alert permanently. He struggled with that.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, and like you said, you can't really sort of comprehend, but it's perception again. So being a bailiff, I know a few lads that do the bailiff stuff, and it is very, very stressful. It is dangerous, and you don't know what you're going to get. So again, it's perception. They're
It was a strange
non-comparable in
job, man.
certain ways, are they?
Yeah, I
It's
think the reason I brought it up, mate, what I was trying to say was I put myself in a lot of situations back then that felt normal then.
yeah,
But now looking back, I look and I think, what the hell was I doing? I mean, on one occasion, I had somebody pouring petrol down my legs telling me he was going to set me on fire.
it's not
I
ideal.
wasn't, and I wasn't bothered in the slightest. So I was like, yeah,
Yeah,
all right then, mate. Carry on. If you got to do it, do it. But you get yourself in this mindset of not backing down, not being scared, and just ploughing forwards, always moving forwards. And I can only, my life experience, the only thing I can compare to what you lads did is that I used to put myself in dangerous situations, but never ever, it just didn't cross my mind until I stopped doing it. And then I looked
yeah,
backwards and I thought, what were you playing at, you idiot?
yeah.
So yeah, it's incredible how quickly people adapt to their environment. I think that's the point I was trying to make in a very long-winded,
Yeah, yeah,
long-winded
yeah.
way.
No, absolutely, it is, and the principles are the same in any sort of kind of work where you face with that sort of adversity, and faced with violence. The principles are the same, and how you react and how you deal with it.
It
But
seems to be a common theme in your life, though, Chris. I mean,
oh God,
mo-
yeah, I know. It's
moving moving things on from the close protection that you did. I mean, you mentioned that you worked anti-piracy as well. Like, how did that come about?
so I actually there was a couple of incidents though. So my ex-wife at the time was pregnant with my, one of my children, and he came a little bit early, so I had to kind of sort of leave Iraq pretty sharpish. But prior to that, a couple of weeks before, there was an incident when I was still on that kind of tourist contract, where we got RKG3. I'm actually, the timeline's a bit. So I did the tourist bit, and then I went on to another contract with the same company looking after the colonel on the colonel's CP team. On the tourist contract, that was the time I swapped drivers, just because I always drove the same vehicle and it was good to have a shakeout. And I says, well, I'll swap. I think it was his suggestion. He was like, I'll drive the third vehicle today and you drive this one, or you have a day off, or whichever kind it fell. And on that particular day, we had an armor-piercing grenade through at the driver's side door, and it blew the door off and fragged Matt through his legs, bless him, when I should have been driving that vehicle. So there's an element of me is a bit of guilt through that, because it should have been actually me. And I think he's made a very, very good recovery over the years, but it's taken 15 years to recover properly from having his legs fragged, and he was treated on scene with tourniquets and the likes of. But again, it's one of them, wrong place, right time, or whichever way you want to look at it. And then that was when things started. I've been in the game maybe 5 years at this point, and I was a bit like, okay, I need to start really thinking of an exit strategy. It's kind of getting a bit much now. I've had quite a few lives. So I swapped contracts anyway. That contract was deemed too dangerous to continue for obvious reasons, so it came to an end, and I went on the Colonel's CP team for quite a few months. And then the turning point came literally a couple of weeks before my little boy was born, and RKG3 grenade again was threw at my vehicle, and it hit the door on the side of the vehicle, and the grenade, for whatever reason, never detonated. We ran into we drove out, called contact on the radio, like contact, drive. We all bugged out. We had the colonel with us, not in my vehicle, but in one of the other vehicles. And he used to love actually travelling by vehicle everywhere, which again, like I say, is the most dangerous place you could be. He never wanted to fly, so we used to take him up to Mosul, to Kirkuk, down all over Iraq, driving him. And yeah, this RKG3 kind of bounced off the door, and if it had detonated, it had come through, took our legs off, or killed both me. Well, I was driving and the commander. But yeah, we got to, on the way into the camp that we were trying to get to, the US call sign came out, and we told them what had happened. And then that night we saw him in the kind of the DFAC, the mess room, where everybody eats. And he were like, you want to put some money on the lottery? You do. He's like, that grenade, the pin had been pulled, and it should have detonated. There's no reason why it shouldn't have detonated. You're lucky.
So what's an RKG, mate? I've heard of an RPG, which I'm assuming is rocket-propelled grenade. What's an RKG?
Correct. So an RKG3 is basically, I believe it's like an old Russian, Soviet, or maybe a German weapon. It's armor piercing. It's like, you would have seen them probably like Call of Duty, my lad plays, and I've seen them on there. And they're shaped like they've got a handle and then like almost like a can on it, like a can of beans, probably a bit bigger. And when they throw them, a little parachute deploys to slow them down and stabilize them. And then when they impact, they send a slug of hot molten metal and frag through the vehicle, and they will pierce tanks.
Oh, right. Jesus Christ.
That slug comes into the vehicle and throws hot metal and shrapnel inside the vehicle and hits you.
So they're designed to hit vehicles.
Well, I don't necessarily think they're designed to hit vehicles, but they're designed to pierce armor and cause maximum kind of damage, and they're horrible bits of kit. And
wow.
What they do is they stand at the side of the road, and again, in hindsight, it's a beautiful thing. I'd seen this guy, and what they do is they pick the third vehicle. I was driving the rear vehicle at this time. They pick that one because, again, it's an easy getaway. There's nothing then to follow up. They stand at the side of the road with their hands behind their back, and they're holding an RKG3. And I saw him, I clocked him. He was about 30 metres when I clocked him in front of the vehicle. And I should have now, looking back, drove the vehicle at him, because I spotted his arms, but we knew what they did with the hands behind the back, but it didn't register quick enough. He launched it at the side of the vehicle and it bounced off. And it dented the vehicle, and where the dent was, it would have come through and cut me in half and the commander as well, So.
Christ, mate.
So, that, you know what, and all the incidents I was involved in, that one's the one that hit harder the most. I was a bit like, what if? And I come away from that, and like I say, I was having my doubts about going home anyway. I've been doing it for long enough. And it just so happened that my little boy came 5 weeks early, so I had to rush off back home. Missed his birth by maybe 24 hours, but he decided he couldn't wait. So I went home and I never went back. I never went back to Iraq. I've never been back since. I don't intend to go back. And all my kit was sent home to me. So yeah, and that's how it came about, really. I wanted something that wasn't away as much because I now had a small child. So I kind of got wind of the sort of anti-piracy again through the people I knew. And that tended to be a month on, a month off.
I was just going to say, when you said wasn't away as much, I was thinking, I'm sure he said off Somalia.
Yeah. Well, you kind of tended to do, and if you do a month on, month off, it's called merchant shipping allowance, which means it's tax free. Right. So you do 6 months out of the country and you don't pay tax. So I mean that's brilliant as well for a short space of time. Obviously, I've paid enough of tax through my subsequent careers after, but at the time it was good. It was a legal way of but you're not in the country, so you're on the seas. So I kind of jumped on that, and it was good because I've been to so many weird and wonderful places. I got stranded in Madagascar for 5 days, where I ended up on the lash there in a nightclub where the guy on the door had an Uzi. And I know this sounds really, really far-fetched, but I swear to God, it's too bizarre to make up. I was with 2 guys from the French Foreign Legion that were on my vessel. We got stuck in Madagascar. We went to a nightclub. I was the only white person in there. And the doorman had an Uzi. And I was like, well, this just sounds like a lovely place. Right on my street, being a former paratrooper, I thought. And that just how it went. And the first maybe 6 transits. So a transit is a journey you jump on in Oman, and then you'd escort the ship to maybe Sri Lanka or kind of East Africa, because obviously the pirates tended to attack the high risk areas. So you jump on the ship, you're armed security, 4 of you with weapons and ammunition, and if the pirates come, you fight them off, and basically you're security guard on a ship, basically.
Did you have much contact with any pirates while you were doing it?
There was a few occasions where it did, but the first 6 transits I did, there was no weapons available, so I had spears and petrol bombs against pirates with AK bombs. Yep, spears and petrol bombs. Phil Campion tells this story as well, because when we had this chat on his podcast, because when he started doing anti-piracy back a little bit before me, he did quite a few transits where you didn't have weapons because of permits. Funding from the companies. It were early days, so you used to get on the ship and try and make weapons. You'd get the chief engineer on some of these vessels to make you Molotov cocktails to throw at the pirates.
I think Nick Dunn is a great example of the issues with permits, isn't he? Yeah. Because again, former guest of this podcast, and he obviously found himself imprisoned in India because of a whole situation to do with permits and weapons
as well.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of kind of stuff like, and you wandered into, obviously in Nick's case, we talk about, I've had Nick on my podcast as well. I'm still waiting to do a part 2 with him. But he kind of, he alluded to, I think, you wander into the wrong waters, and that, I think that's what happened. And it was a political statement with Nick. I think they weren't doing what they said he was doing, and that's obviously proven now as well. I mean, it was a dodgy kind of line of work, and it sounds very glamorous, and it was in some aspects. I mean, I got to stay off in Tanzania. I spent a lot of time in Sri Lanka. When you wasn't on a vessel, you'd be waiting at the villa in Sri Lanka to go out. We had a villa on the beach. I mean, it sounds terrible.
I think before we move too far past it, and I forget to ask Chris, the question that's on my mind here is, how was your night in that club with a man with a Uzi? Was it a good night?
I can't remember. The beer was really strong. And no, it was fine. I was with 2, one of a veteran who'd been in the French Foreign Legion 21 years, Youssef from North Africa, from Morocco. Absolutely cracking bloke. And there was a few people in there, like Africans that spoke French. And he was a French speaker because of obviously the French Foreign Legion. So he spoke to people, and it was a really, really good night. But it was a bit like, a lot of the people in there hadn't seen Westerners or people that were white, so you were like a focal point for a lot of people, like amazed that you was in, and yeah, it was a bizarre experience. But again, one of them crazy kind of nights. But yeah, I did get rather intoxicated. I think I was dehydrated because it was red hot as well. So I'll blame it on the dehydration and not the fact that I'm a lightweight.
Oh, definitely, mate. Yeah, probably hadn't eaten either that day.
Oh well, of course. Yeah, and it must have been a dodgy pint.
That was it. Yeah.
So yeah.
Wow. Interesting, mate.
Yeah, well,
interesting.
Yeah, so the anti-piracy went on. I did that for about 3 years, and the weird bit is like I did back and forth all over the place, and in between on my month off, I actually sort of got into the surveillance industry. So I started doing surveillance. I did a surveillance course. I worked for BBC Rogue Traders. You remember the program Rogue Traders?
I do, mate. You were a part of that.
Yeah, I used to, with Dom and
Dominic Littlewood,
Matt Albright.
Yeah.
So I
don't talk too much about that now, Chris. You might have a few people listening in the construction industry. They're going to shoot that bastard.
Yeah, well, I did all the background work for that for surveillance. So I used to be tasked with going out to do basically. They'd have a couple of dodgy kind of cowboys on the show, and I'd be tasked with basically on my own doing a pattern of life for when the film crew went in. So I follow them around for about 2 or 3 days.
Okay.
Surprisingly, the size I am, I'm actually really, really good at being sneaky and following people. I'm not a stalker. I was very good at the surveillance stuff. Just for legal reasons, I'm not a stalker.
Mate, people probably see you and just automatically look away. I don't want to look at him too long.
I blend in surprisingly well, or at least I did. And yeah, so I did all the kind of background work for Road Traders for a number of seasons. And a lot of my photos have been in the show that I took of the builders doing, but it was pattern of life. So what entrance they went into their kind of workshop. So when they came and did the sting, as it were, on the program, they knew where they were going to be, what they could, how to get access, where they left from, and all that. And I continued to do that on my day. When I was back for a month, I did a job for Gordon Ramsay, true story as well, that was in the Daily Mail in 2010. Followed Gordon Ramsay's father-in-law around London for 2 weeks.
Okay, what was that about?
So his father-in-law was allegedly embezzling money out of the company because he owned part of the kind of Gordon Ramsay holdings with Gordon Ramsay. And he was embezzling money out of the company, and he was having an affair with someone in the company. It's all been in the Daily Mail now. Well, that 2010, it was big front page news. But I did all the kind of stuff for that pretty much on my own as well, followed him around. I put a tracker on his vehicle and followed him around London for 2 weeks. Yeah, and then caught him. The pictures never came out, actually, but I'm sure I've got them somewhere. But I followed him around to a massive house in Ascot, and they had the windows and the curtains open at the back. And I had 2 tasks: find out who he was having an affair with, and he bought a flat somewhere over in Chelsea, and try and locate this flat that he was penthouse flat that he was funding from the business. So I followed him to this big house in Ascot, and honestly, it's better luck than judgment. Again, this sounds false, but I assure you it's completely true. I wouldn't say it in front of all your viewers if it wasn't, because I get called out. But I've told this to my people at the fire station. People get absolutely fredders with me telling this story. I was like, have you heard my Gordon Ramsay story? And they're like, yes, for Christ's sake. So yeah, basically, and there he was in the window, plain as your day, playing with this bird, topless lady, and everything else. Got all the photos
in the window.
In the window, mate. I swear to God. And she
mate,
out...
that does sound like a movie, doesn't it? If you're going to do it anywhere, in front of the open window is not the one.
It was a big house, but she turned out to be something to do. Again, I don't want to say false things. Allegedly, the accountant from the company. So there, you put 2 and 2 together, and then I followed him to this flat in over Chelsea Bridge, and I conned my way in. A lot of this stuff's about bluffing. Spoke to the concierge. He went in through a gated complex, but spoke to the concierge and said, look, this is my uncle. My phone's gone dead. Is there any way you will let me in through the gated complex? And he was like, no, absolutely not. I was begging with him, wouldn't do it. Anyway, I walked off, and then he come following me. And he went, mate. He went, I feel sorry for you. He went, here's the gate code. Here's his car parking space. Here's his flat number. I was like, bingo. Put it all in a big report. And send it to Gordon Ramsay. I got paid about $2.5 grand for 2 weeks' work. which is back in 2010 for me.
A lot of
Was
money back then.
Not compared to you tradesmen. That's like a day's work, isn't it?
Oh, Chris,
That's gonna
with
go
the
down
low
well, isn't it?
blows, mate. With the low blows. First of all, you say you used to work on rogue traders. Now you're coming after me.
I know.
But yeah, actually, mate, joking aside, the trades are a good place to be now. So any kids watching this? But
Absolutely, yeah.
Listen, demand dictates value, and at the moment there is big demand because there's not people coming into the trades. One of the things I'm trying to champion, to be honest, is, I know we're going off on a tangent here, but yeah, is the trades are a damn good place to be. I would say in the next 10 years, it's going to be even more so because the people going out vastly outnumber the people coming in. And I mean, it's like anyone. You talk to anyone in the UK, you try and find a good tradesperson. They do exist, but they're busy, they're booked up. You try and find somebody. I know there's a company, a big social media company called On The Tools. I don't know if you've heard of them.
Yeah, I've heard of them, yeah.
So this year, earlier in the year, they actually did a campaign essentially trying to highlight this. And I mean, in my trade as a painter and decorator, mate, I'm never going to get an emergency call out. I'm never going to get somebody ring me and go, Russ, your kitchen looks terrible at 2 a.m. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a good point.
But what you will have is you'll have people with water pissing through the ceiling. You'll have people where the electric's gone off. And when it gets to the stage in the UK where you call an emergency plumber because you've got water pouring through the ceiling and they go, right, okay, mate, no trouble. I'll be there about 2 weeks Tuesday. That's where it's heading at the moment because
I can imagine,
there aren't enough people coming in. So yeah, a bit of a diversification.
No, it is. You're right there. But each one of my neighbours both are brickers, and I'm on a new build site. Okay. I live on a new build site. And this is like I live on phase 1, and they're on to phase 2 or 3 now across the road. Massive. So I live right on the edge of Sure Forest, near the major oak, in a place called Edwinstowe, and they work on the site, and they're on as a firefighter. They're on way more money than I am.
There is. Joking aside, mate, I mean, there's a lot of trades, but a lot of people that are running their own business in the construction industry, six figures is not, it's not even rare. If you speak to a self-employed electrician, they'll be turning over 6 figures.
I bet, yeah.
And you know, there's a lot of room for wiggle within 6 figures. But yeah, there's a lot of the trades, mate. Bricklayers are earning really good money. Electricians are earning. In fact, all the trades, if you're good, there's good money to be made. I mean, me personally, I've been a decorator for 24 years, as we mentioned. And I remember, mate, when I first started in the trade, there was probably 5 years where there was this shelf of you could not earn more than £100 a day. And to get over that 100, it was like this big block. Nobody was charging more than £100 a day. And it took years and years and years to go over it. But it's like the brakes are off now. You know, I know some people in my industry that are earning 1,500 quid a week. And I'd have looked at that years ago and thought, absolute sausage. There's no way that's happening. But it's the truth. You know, there's people out there now, and obviously, depending on what area of the country you live in, does make a big difference. But there's good money to be had in the trades, and it will continue that way because it's not even showing signs of slowing down in terms of the people coming in. That's so rare now. And as I say, demand dictates value.
Yeah, I think that the reasoning behind that, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, was what I'm kind of learning as I'm going with the research I do for podcasts and guests as well. It's like what you get with kids nowadays, I think they have this unrealistic reality created by social media that they think that they see people that are kind of influencers. And I know we kind of a little bit fall into that bracket now. I don't like really using the term as such, but they think that. But we've got into this after a lifetime of graft and work and our experiences. But they see all these guys, and you know, fair play. You know, I think when one of my kids was younger, they turned around and said, I want to be a YouTuber. And I was a bit like, but you know, there is money to be earned doing it. But they want everything without the kind of, seems like they want everything without the graft and the effort. And that's the thing. And they don't want, it seems like too much like hard work. And like you tell me, I mean, I've worked briefly on building sites throughout my life. It is hard work. You know, you've got to work for it, haven't you?
It is, mate. It's graft. It's that thing, isn't it? They want to see the view from the top of the mountain without climbing it. And the thing is, I've noticed a difference. So I have, over the years, I've had many apprentices myself. I've had a lot of lads that have worked for me and my company, and I've noticed a difference. So when I first came into the trade, and I'm not going to get my violin out here, but it was a lot harder than it
This little one.
currently is. Yeah, just a little tiny one. But it was a lot harder than it is now, just based on the technology advances. So we've got things like, dustless sanding systems in my industry now, where you don't really hand sand anything anymore. We've got all the extractors. It keeps the air clean, keeps it healthy. And there's a lot of investment in my company that's gone into that. So my apprentice now, my son, I don't think he's ever really hand sanded anything. I went through years and years of going home with no fingertips, because that was all I did for literally years on end, is sand and prep and sand and prep. But I used to put a hard week's graft in, and I would go home and I'd be like, oh, I'm knackered. And that was a badge of honour. That was like, yeah, you've earned that. You've earned that tiredness. Well done. Good on you. And it was applauded, and I would wear it like, yes, I'm tired, means I've worked hard. That's something to be proud of. I have legitimately had parents of apprentices ring me up because their kid has come home tired, and they shouldn't be tired. And they've come home and, he's come, his arms are aching. He tells me that, he's been having to paint a ceiling all day. Surely he should have more breaks. He shouldn't come home in pain because of his day's work. And this is part of the problem,
Yes.
that the entitlement now that you should be able to reap the rewards without having to put the effort in is an issue. And it is keeping people out of the trades. Not everyone. I'm not going to blanket the whole generation, because there are some really good kids coming through.
Absolutely.
Just not enough. But there is that entitlement of everyone thinking that they're entitled to a good living wage without really having to put themselves out and make sacrifices to obtain it. It's just a whole mindset shift, isn't it, Chris? I don't know about how you feel about it.
No, I absolutely. It's the last sort of, I think, in every generation will tell you that in their day, it was commonly in the military, they go, in my day, God, we did that with, rusty nails in our boots and broken glass and stuff, and that's how it kind of was. And you're like, right, okay. But reality is, the standards are there, the skills are still there. But I think this has been the biggest shift in the last 10 years that I've noticed anyway. And I don't know whether, again, because it's an age where I'm perceiving it different, but, and I think it stems, and I don't want to get political because I don't do politics and I don't do, this and that. But, with the school system is a bit like, everyone gets an award. I think they've gone away from that now. But when I remember, like my kids in school, and it'd be like, oh, everyone gets an award, regardless. No, there's no winners. There's no. And life's not like that. You want to win at life, you've got to try hard. You've got to succeed. You've got to put in the effort, and there's a reward at the end of it. You can't just turn up, do the same as someone that's grafting the nuts off, and then all of a sudden get the same reward. What does that teach anyone? And I might be speaking out of turn with that, and there'll be people that do disagree with that. But I think generally that's... And what the media has done a brilliant job of is making everyone believe that that's what everyone thinks, when really it's not. Most people think probably like-minded individuals like yourself and me,
I think to flip it into a positive, if there's that young generation now that are listening to, or of a different mindset, the world is wide open. Like, if you've got a youngster now that has got that drive and got that, that they're willing to sacrifice, they're willing to work hard to get what they want, I think it's probably been easier. It's probably easier to do that now than it ever has been, because there isn't the competition, because it isn't a common mindset anymore to go out and really, put yourself out to get what you want. So to those that do pick up that attitude and that mindset, I think it's probably... there's better opportunities out there in the world now than there ever has been.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I'd be inclined to agree. And, I think we're led to believe that it's tougher now than it's ever been for people. And, there is a certain aspect as well. I mean, I could just walk into an agency back when I left school if I wanted to, and pick up a job and start work the following day. I think that kind of thing's gone a little bit away. I don't know if that's still, jobs seem to be a little bit hot. The lesser skilled jobs seem to be perhaps a little bit harder to come by. Probably because people want just the easy side of things rather than having to go to college for 3 years and do a full-on course and put the graft in again. That's probably where that stems from. Again, I'm not saying I'm right or wrong, but, it kind of would appear that way,
Yeah, I mean, you can go deeper, can't you, mate? Like with the agency work, I mean, there's a lot of manufacturing has left the UK now. Yeah. So a lot of those jobs don't exist anymore. Those manual jobs are now becoming automated. Again, I can go really off-piste with this, but I did, I went on I'm going to keep it really, really short and concise. I went on I'm not going to name the brand either, went on a factory tour of a particular brand recently, like a behind the scenes kind of thing for some promotional work, and so much of it is automated, and it was their goal to automate virtually everything. So all the old jobs, the picking off the shelf, the packing, the moving of such a huge automated plant within my industry was now, I was struck by the size of the place and how few humans were there. It was all being automated, and the managing directors were talking about how it was their goal to automate even more of the process, and they were interestingly hiding behind equality. Trying to think how much of this I can say. So, in theory, right, theoretically, there was a circumstance where there was a bag that weighed, I think this bag, part of the production process, a bag had to be moved, right? I'm going to keep it very vague. And this bag weighed 20 kilograms. And I was told that it was regulation that you could only ask a female to lift a weight of, I think, 15 kilograms. You can ask a man to lift 20. So and they were hiding behind, because of equality, they were going to automate the process because it wasn't fair that you couldn't ask a female to do that job. It was only men that were able to do that job because of the legislation on the weight of the bag. Now, there's a few arguments there. You could argue that, some women are more than capable of lifting the same bag. But I just found it fascinating that their cure for that was to take that job away entirely and automate the process of moving that weight under the banner of equality. They were actually taking away jobs. And I raised that point privately with the person who was giving the tour. And the response I got was, well, that isn't the case. We're not taking jobs away. There will be different jobs created by the automation of the process, i.e. servicing the machinery, blah, 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 that can be equal opportunity. And I thought, yeah, it was bollocks, isn't it? You're taking a team of 20 and turning it into a maintenance team of 2, essentially.
It's balmy. But that fact, I'll be sure to tell that my fiance, who's a firefighter as well, and she'll love that fact about not being able to lift the same as the guys, because
there you go.
When she's dragging casualties out of house fires and that, there's no complaints,
Exactly. It's not tarring everyone with the same brush, absolutely. But it was whatever their company policy was that they couldn't do.
It seems like a cop out that just to get rid of staff and save money, doesn't it? And hiding behind equality by the sounds of it, which is
that was how I saw it, mate.
Against everything that we're kind of trying to do with promoting equality and diversity and things like that. So it's like counterproductive. I don't understand.
That was how I saw it. It's my personal opinion, just to put it out there. I'm sure people will put ones and twos together as to who I'm talking about and what I'm talking about. But that was just my opinion on the situation. So yeah, mate, we've really we've gone right off on a different track here, mate, haven't we?
Always does.
But it's all relevant. It's all relevant, and it all pays into what we're talking about as well, mate. I'm going to try and pull it back, Chris. I'm going to try and pull it back. So, Anti-Piracy, Somalia, 3 years. The other part of your life that I do want to talk about, mate, and how it links from there to there was the boxing. So were you boxing throughout your life, or did this start when you came back after doing
I did box as a teenager, not competitively, just on kind of boxing clubs on the pads. I've been a boxing fan, watching Nigel Benn and Chris Eubank on Friday night fight night back in the day on ITV with my dad, and listening to Bruno and Tyson at early hours in the morning on the radio, through the night. So I've been a boxing fan. So I'm a fan turned, I'll say, boxer with the loosest of terms. But yeah, I got a bit into it in my teens, did a bit, no fights, got up, went in the military, and like, it's not boxing, it's called milling. You know, when you do P Company, you do something called milling. Have you ever heard of that?
No, mate.
So one of the tests on P Company is you fight someone of equal size for a minute. Not allowed to block, you're not allowed to box, straight punching each other in the face. It's controlled aggression. When you're told to stop, you stop, and it's keep moving forward when you're faced with adversity. There's nothing more adverse, in my opinion, than being punched in the face. It scares people shitless.
That's pretty adverse, yeah.
So I did 3 P companies. And again, this is a true fact. Anyone that served with me knows this story. I did 3 P companies, and I milled 5 times, twice on the first P company. It's unheard of. Twice on the first P company, twice on the second P company, and once on the third time. The first 2 P companies, the 4 guys that I fought, I stopped and beat ridiculous, not ridiculously. It was just I won sort of, pretty convincingly. So I got a bit cocky, and then the third P company, I was putting with a big scarce lad, and I got a draw because he hit like a train. How I got a draw, I don't know, but it was a lesson learned again. Don't get too cocky. So I realised I kind of had a bit of I'm not a particularly good boxer, but I had good cardio, and I do hit hard, and I'm a big lad. So it was a bit like, I probably would have fared better at cruiserweight, I'm not going to lie, but I like my snap and I like my wine. So it was a no-brainer really just to be a heavyweight. It saves.
How tall are you, Chris? Out of interest,
I'm
mate?
I'm 6'2" and 17 stone now, so I'm quite a big guy.
Okay.
But I'm still, I probably could. I vary in weight. I do some nutritional plans sometimes. I got down to under 15 stone in July and got proper shredded in July, like with a 6-pack, the lot, just to prove I could still do it through a nutritionist and everything else. But I've been on a cruise since then, so I've got kind of fluffy. So I did it all the way through, playing at it on punch bags, bits of sparring here and there. And then I thought, well, I'm getting too old now. So I booked myself in for like a white collar fight when I was on the ships. No idea who I was fighting. Trained myself on the ships. Thought I was training hard enough on the ships, doing all sorts of bits. And I did train hard on the ships. I used to train 3 times a day because there was nothing else to do. Run around the ships, do pull-ups, do press-ups, you name it. Find a punch bag hung up somewhere, do rounds on that. And I came back to this white collar event in a nightclub in Nottingham, and I fought a big black youth, lovely lad. His name's Jordan, but he was 6'6". I've got the photo somewhere of us staring off, and I am staring up. He was about 6'6", and at this time I was probably about 15 stone. Must have been easily 17 and a half stone, and I was like, "What have I?" My dad came to it, bless him, and a lot of my friends, and they all kept coming up to me and going, "Mate, you can leave now if you want." And I was like, no. I was like, well, thanks for the vote of confidence.
Yeah, that's great.
My dad was like, seriously, no one will think any less of you if you just walk away. I was like, Dad, trust me, I'll be fine. I worked in Baghdad, for Christ's sake. I'm fine doing 3 2-minute rounds with this youth. So I got in, and we fought like nail and tooth. It was really, really close. I got a draw, and it got fight of the night. But I was hanging out my arse, and that was where I instantly thought I like the boxing side of things. It's controlled aggression, so I kind of set at it from then. I obviously got into the fire service in 2013, and I was offered the opportunity to box for the fire service, so I went from there, and then I ended up the third or fourth fight I ever fought in. I got offered to fight a motor point in front of It's all on the unlicensed scene, so it's not like it's a professional or an amateur, not that skill set. The unlicensed scene's very, very big now, but it's just not as governed as well, and the matchmaking is not brilliant. But in for a penny, in for a pound. So I ended up fighting at the Motorpoint Arena in front of 4,000 people. I fought quite late at night, about 8:30 at night as well, so it was pretty rammed. And I fought a former England rugby player called Mark the Beast Hilton, that played for Warrington Wasps, and he is exactly that, an absolute machine. If you've seen a picture of him, you'd be like, Jesus Christ. So I got paired off with him had a bit of a really weird press conference. I was a bit like, what am I doing here with a name tag? And there was like a few cameras and people filmed it and took pictures. I was like, I don't understand. I've boxed 3 times. I'm 36 at this time, I think I was. I was like, what am I doing? And I ended up getting in, and I ended up stopping him in the 3rd round, knocked him out. He headbutted me. I had to be glued that night as well, but I loved it, absolutely loved it. So I went on from there, run a couple of area titles for an organisation. These organisations are quite common, accumulated in the last one in April this year at 44, and that's when I realised now that it's time to stop. I fought in a prize fight.
You fought in April?
Yeah. Honestly, my brain's just not wired up right. I know that. I'm not stupid. I know that. So I took one. I'd not fought in a year, and someone offered me a fight in Cumbria for 300 quid. And I was like, well, why not? Went up, drove up there, turned up. Hostile crowd, obviously hated me. Home team booing the lot on my own. Got paid for it, and they changed the opponent last minute. And I ended up fighting another professional rugby player who was literally like a piece of iron, like a scene out of Rocky IV. He wasn't particularly bigger than me or anything, but I hit hard, and I've stopped quite a few opponents with my power. I hit him flush in the face, and he kind of smirked at me, and I was like, I'd not trained for it either. I was unfit. I looked in shape, but I'd done weights and got myself in shape, but not cardio-wise. So I was hanging out my arse, honestly, and I think I scraped a win on that one, but I don't know how. But yeah, it's I fought in a prize fighter, 3 fights in one night.
Jesus Christ, mate, how did that go?
Yeah, I went into it with my coach said, look, you're by far on paper the least skilled and probably one of the oldest in the competition. But he says, I see your work ethic when we're in the gym. He says, you're the fittest in the gym. And they're one of the sponsors, actually, of the podcast, Lions Den Boxing Club, under Sam Goodrum. Thought I'd give them a bit of a shout out. And he at late 30s, he kind of took me under the wing and says, like, your cardio is really good and you're actually all right. You'll go further than you may think. So I was like, well, that's it. I threw everything into it, entered into a prize fighter in Nottingham. There was some guys in that so I possibly the toughest route you could get that I picked. The first guy, the guy I didn't want to fight. There was 2 guys I didn't want to fight, and I drew it. He was an ex-professional. He'd had 70 fights as a pro. A lad called Jody Meikle. He went on to them after. So I fought him in the prize fighter and I beat him on points. He put me down after 20 seconds, and I got up and then stuck it all over him for 2 rounds and got the win on points. He then went on to become the world heavyweight bare knuckle champion, beating Dorian Darch at the O2.
Wow.
So I was quite happy with that. And then I drew another guy in the second fight, Sean Williams, 200 fights. I'd had 5 or 6 at this point. And I outworked him and beat him on points. And then the guy I fought, I'm not making excuses. I've actually thought about trying it because this guy's my only loss. His name's Danny Whitaker. He went on after I'd fought him to rank 18th as a pro. Fought David Adelaide at the O2 on one of Frank Warren's undercards. I think it was Frank Warren or Eddie Hearn's undercard. And he'd knocked both his opponents out, the first round and the second round. So he worked about 30 seconds, and I'd had 6 rounds, on points. So I was 10 years older than him. No excuses. He beat me fair and square on points. I went the distance with him. I still think if I was fresh, I'd have beat him. And I've spoke to him recently, bless him, and said, let's get it on, because it's the only loss I've had out of 14 fights, and I want to avenge that. Whether my body can hold up to it, I don't know. But yeah, no, I fought last in without waffling. I got to the final, didn't win, sadly lost on points. But I fought another fight after that, won another belt, and then I fought in April for the fire service, and I knocked the bloke out in 52 seconds. But in that sounds impressive, and I won this veteran's belt. Sounds impressive, but in that 52 seconds, I bust my shoulder and tore my hamstring. So I was like,
Wow.
it's time to. Mother Nature waits for no one, So, and I'm going to be dead. I'm going to be dead honest. It sounds like I'm not a good boxer at all. I was just fit and I hit hard, and I was able to outwork a lot of these people. And the sad thing is, really, when I spar, I'm very technical and I look really good. When I get into a ring, I get drawn into a war because I just kind of enjoy it. So I never look that great when I'm boxing in a ring, but I spar really good, which, it is.
To be honest, though, Chris, I mean, don't get me wrong. I know we're talking about some of the greats here, but you see, like, the whole Tyson fighting at, what is he, 64, something like that?
57, I think he is, Tyson.
Well, I don't know where I got 64 from. Maybe I was thinking about one of some of those greats, though. I mean, they've gone on to do these like exhibitions 10 years beyond where you are. Can you see yourself carrying it on?
No, I never say never. I'm very much like, and again, because I fought on the last time and people were telling me, it's like, you're too old, you need to give it up. And I was like, I'll show you that I'm not too old. And that was like a bit of my driving force. And I always wanted to fight in front. My lad's 14 now, and I wanted to he wanted to come and see me fight. So I was a bit like, right, I'll dust them off. And I mean, I'd not fought in 2 years. And my fiance, she's not seen me box. So she was like, I'd like to see you box, and a few other people. So I was like, you know what, I'll do it. It was for charity. It was for charity. We always raise money for the firefighters charity. And this guy.
Mate.
So yeah, I thought, sod it, in for a penny. But I was actually having a cigarette because I ran out of vapes about 20 seconds before I got called for the fight. So I didn't really prepare too well for it. But that's just me in a nutshell, mate, to be honest.
Have you ever, because I mean, it seems to be a massive like uprising at the moment. So I've always followed, I'm quite a fight fan myself, never really got into, I've never done it myself. But I've always been like a big UFC fan right from the early days. I mean, I went down to the O2 when the UFC used to come over and put on decent cards. I met the likes of Rampage Jackson, Chuck Liddell, all the that was my era of UFC when I first got into it. But what I was getting at is like this bare knuckle thing has really taken off now, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. And you know what? I've just had Alex Reed. I think I said to you before, Alex Reed was on the podcast last week, who's a cage fighter. Well, he used to be a cage fighter. And I've just had Jack Marshman on this morning, that was a cage fighter that was in the UFC. And he was like the Bama and the Cage Warriors middleweight champion. But Alex Reed talked about it, about bare knuckle, and I have been offered it myself.
I was going to say, have you ever considered it?
I have, just not to give it Billy Big Balls at all, because I'm not like that. I see things as challenges, and it's something that, and it's difficult for a non-fighter or someone that's not interested in combat sports to get you. Why would you want to do that? And I've told people, and my fiance's she's brilliant. She's really, really supportive. She was like, look, I don't really want you to do it, but I know if that's an itch you need to scratch, then go and do it. And I was offered one in Rotherham. The problem I have is I've broke both my hands. I broke this one twice, and I think I broke this one once, boxing and misspent youth. So I don't know. I don't think my hands are hold up. Your hands are hold up. I don't know whether they would. I'd like to tick off one of those, mate. On a bucket list.
Obviously, I've never watched your fight. I'm just listening to everything that we've talked about in this conversation here. Screams that like the way you say you get drawn into the fight, that you're a hard hitter. And I think of like a famous example, UFC, Mike Perry. Who I'm on about. So didn't particularly do amazingly well at UFC, but went over to bare knuckle and he won all the belts going until he decided to go and fight Jake Paul, which is another subject, isn't it? But he did incredibly well at bare knuckle.
Yeah. I know it's big news in a minute, the bare knuckle and stuff like that. But again, I just have to. I don't know if I'd be, and I'm honest. I do like a challenge, and I do, but I don't know whether the problem I have now. If I push myself with training too hard, I get injured. I've torn hamstrings, I've torn my groin, I've got rotor cuff issues, And the likes of, I'm not making excuses, it's just part, but I train 5 times a week, weights, I do quite a lot of bag work, I spar from time to time, but that's about my limit. I can't run anymore. I used to run, I've done triathlons in the past, like sprint triathlons. And I used to run and stuff, but I can't do it anymore because every time I run, I tear a calf. So to do the fitness required to do myself justice, I just don't think I can get there without getting injured, And that's
I
reality.
see a lot of them, those bare knuckle fights, mate. They just don't seem to last as long, do they?
No.
Because I guess you can do a lot of damage very quickly in that. But then again, that's another reason to not get into it. And if I'm honest, I wouldn't do it. But
no, I do like the idea behind it, and I'm not saying never. I'd like to probably tick one off and maybe do it, and even at the lower levels, they do actually pay all right, and it's not ticket sales because it's obviously, you run the risk of getting probably less seriously injured than boxing, to be fair, because you're not taking constant
so many hits,
concussive hits. You're going to get cut. A cut's a cut. It's stitches. It's superficial. So as much as they look very violent and people have got massive cuts, and they're actually only superficial injuries, so they're not actually as dangerous. I mean, I'm not no expert, but never say never. Watch this space.
If you ever do, mate, let me know and I'll come and watch. I always love a bit of love a combat sport. What I do want to get onto, mate, because I'm conscious of the time now, is the fact that we were or are treading this same sort of path around the mental health, and like your story is an incredible one, mate. And as with the other lads that have been in the forces and had these kind of backgrounds I've spoken to, I've said that your journeys, they just scream like mental resilience to me. And that's why I like talking to people such as yourself, so you can get that across. People can take inspiration from your stories. What interests me, what made you want to get into the whole like mental health circle of doing what you're doing in terms of trying to spread the awareness in the same way I am? Like, how did you come across that? Like, what was your journey into that, Chris?
But there's quite a few reasons. Obviously, we've spoke on the phone and we spoke a bit off air, didn't we? But I've kind of over the probably since joining the fire service, and like I said, I've been a firefighter for about 12 years now, and I think having lost and seeing people struggle with the mental health in the fire service, and I've lost no end of friends and colleagues and acquaintances over the years from the military and the close protection industry, and some sadly from the fire service, that have taken their own lives through a suicide. So I was a bit like, if I can do something to kind of raise a bit of an awareness, there was selfish reasons. I kind of enjoy talking to interesting people like yourself and the guests that I have on. So for that side of things, it's a bit of a selfish reason, I suppose. But I thought if I could do some good and spread the word, and my idea behind it, and we touched on this, was same sort of principle. Is like on my podcast, I've had some like big SAS names, some Falklands veterans, some heavyweight boxers. I've had Johnny Nelson on, and I kind of think Mick Hawkes, ex-SAS, and I think if I can get these guys, if these guys are open about their mental health, and some touch on it, some don't. Not all guests have had the struggles. I mean, I talked to Wolf off Gladiators as one of the guests a few weeks back, and I told him, if there's any, and he went, I've never struggled with mental health, so there's nothing really I can. And I was like, well, that's fair enough. Not everyone has, and thankfully, good on him. He's never had any problems with it, and I wish that was the way for everyone. But sadly, it's more common, as we know. So if I can get these names of people, that are big, tough SAS people, same as you in the building trade, big aerials, brickies and sparkies and all that stuff, to talk about it, then I'm hoping that people that view these podcasts will go, well, if they're happy to talk about it, then, surely, it's not a bad thing. The stigma's getting slowly diminished, and people are talking about it, and it's getting out there, And I think, like, I've seen way more in the fire service doing the job that I do now than I ever did working different. You're not involved in where someone's trying to kill you. You're trying to save life. But, going into house fires and stuff like that. And I had a bit of a wobble. It was different with me. So 6 years ago, as we alluded to earlier, I kind of had what I thought was depression and anxiety. And I went to my GP and told him, what I'd done, and I couldn't sleep, and I had these feelings of impending doom, and I was like rock bottom. I couldn't pick myself up, and I couldn't get out of it for days, and then I'd snap out of it. And straight away, the bit that annoyed me, that within 2 minutes of me telling him, he was prescribing me antidepressants. And I went to the pharmacy, bought the paid for the prescription, got the antidepressants, and I never took them. Now, I always say this, like my fiance, in the nicest possible way, after we'd been together maybe 18 months, she said to me, she said, I don't mean this in a like disrespecting manner, but have you ever had yourself checked out for anything, because your thought process is a bit different to most people's, and your lifestyle? And I was like, I haven't. No. I was like, what do you mean? She was like, have you ever been investigated for ADHD or autism as well? And I was like, I haven't. No. So I started doing research and going through various questionnaires, and long story short, I wasn't suffering from depression or anxiety. I was struggling with ADHD that I thought. And some of the symptoms you get with ADHD, you can be mixed up for other things. And it's the same with depression and anxiety. Sometimes there's underlying issues that cause. So through my own research, I kind of, and various questions, I've never been formally diagnosed. I have been really open about that. I've not seen the point. Spoke to GPs that I know as friends that have given me questionnaires that they do. I've answered several of them, and they all come back 99.9% that I've got ADHD. That's all I need. I'm not a fan of labels, but it helps me understand my own brain. So I don't feel like I need a formal diagnosis as such. I'm pretty certain I have it. But that was also, so it was to raise awareness for mental health issues, and obviously for ADHD as well. And you know what? For anything that needs raising awareness with, I'm prepared to have guests on to talk about it if it helps people.
1,000%.
I'm all for it. It doesn't necessarily have to be mental health related or ADHD. It can be absolutely anything, as long as it's spreading positivity. I am not about negativity at all.
Well done, mate. I mean, the way I look at it, and I've said this a few times around the mental health subject, is when it comes to podcast guests, there can be a little bit of a misconception that I just want to talk to people that have been down, had really bad times. That's not the truth. I would love to talk to both ends of the spectrum. So mental health is good and bad. So when I'm talking about mental health, it doesn't have to be bad mental health. It can be somebody that has gone through life with no issues whatsoever. Okay, great. How did you do that? So how do you cope with these things? Like, how have you lived your life and managed and maintained your mental health so well? Tell me about that, because that can then be passed on as help and advice. So it's the mental health spectrum, mate, because I've said this so many times now. Everyone's got it. Everyone has mental health in the same way everyone has physical health. So it's so easy to talk about it, because everything in life contributes to your mental health, really. So there's so many subjects, and much like yourself, mate, I would imagine we've got a lot in common, because I find just having conversations, genuine, authentic conversations with people, that's what holds me. That's fascinating. Whether you call it a hobby, an interest, or a passion, whatever it might be, I just love talking to people, and I find that's where growth comes from. That's where knowledge comes from. And that's where you learn a lot. You learn. I can talk to the likes of you that has had a myriad of experiences that I have never had and never will. So I want to hear about that. I want to learn about that. I want to learn from that. And I've loved the journey that I've been on only over the course of the time. In fact, again, before I forget, Chris, because I have a habit of drifting off on things, to anyone that's listening that wants to tune, because you've had some incredible guests, mate, all credit to you. To anyone that's listening that wants to tune into your podcast, do you want to just let people know where they can find it, what it's called, and all the rest of it?
Yeah, absolutely, pal. I appreciate it. I'm on YouTube with the Old Paratrooper podcast. Same with Instagram, same the Old Paratrooper podcast, and on Facebook as well. I do TikTok. I've got an Old Paratrooper podcast account on TikTok with clips on, all leading to the YouTube channel and Spotify and all the usual things. But to navigate myself around TikTok, I need my kids to show me how to get the most of that. But yeah, the Old Paratrooper podcast on YouTube. Please give me a subscribe. Like yourself, the more kind of followers you get, the more the further the messages reach, and it's about
Exactly.
that reach and trying to get the messages out there, and that's what I've been trying to do from the off, probably the same as yourself.
100%, mate. And, to re-emphasise that, if you're listening to this, subscribe to both of us.
Absolutely,
It
pal,
does make a difference. It takes a few 10, 20 seconds of your time to hit that like and subscribe button. But what that does for us making these podcasts and giving up our time and attention to do that is it will then highlight it on these platforms as being more popular, and it will then push it to more new people. So it will put it in front of more people on the discovery pages of all these apps and websites. And that's how the audience grows. And what I'm doing, what Chris is doing, is the same sort of thing. We're trying to get that message spread, trying to break down that stigma as much as we can. And you can't do that without it getting in front of people, because as much as I hugely value and appreciate my audience, we're already connecting. What I'm trying to do is connect with that audience and then above and beyond, and that's exactly what Chris is doing. So if you are listening and you haven't already, please do like, share, follow, subscribe, and all of that stuff, because it does make a difference. It might not seem like it really does, but if enough of you guys do that, it does.
Absolutely. No, totally agreed. All that kind of good stuff really, really helps all the kind of podcast. And again, I'm big, the same as you, about supporting other podcasts that are trying to do the same thing. And I'm happy to come on them. I'm happy to have other podcasts and share your stuff. I said to you before, tag me and stuff, I'll share it, and just about networking and kind of helping each other. 7 billion people in the world. There's enough love to go around, isn't it?
100%, mate. I think that's one of the things I do love about this whole. It's a weird one, mate, because I get the occasional person refer to me as a podcaster. I'm not a podcaster. I'm a decorator. Call me a million and one things. This is I'm not ready to adopt that label yet. But
No.
the thing I love about the community, as it were, within this is that people are willing to. It isn't. Nobody seems to hold the gate shut. It's a case of networking, jumping on each other's podcasts, having a chat, and promoting each other along the way.
Yeah, 100%, pal.
So, mate, I feel like we've kind of bypassed the chapter of your life of being a firefighter. However, I'd say, because we're getting around about the 2-hour mark, mate, it's been an incredible conversation so far. I'd say potentially it leaves the door open for a chapter 2 down the line.
No, well, I always try and say, my fiance and myself are make for a good podcast, because she's, she kind of appeals to the female audience of trying to get people to join the fire service, and kind of, again, getting rid of that stigma that a lot of females think perhaps that they can't do the job, or for whatever reason. And she's testament to that. And she's an absolutely excellent firefighter. I say that all the time. She's actually 10
How long
times
has she
better.
been a firefighter?
About 6 years now. We were on the same watch for a while, and then she's just recently moved to another station. But we're on the same watch pattern, so we do the same shifts. So we're off at the same time and stuff. But yeah,
mate, listen. Down the line, I've just sort of got this new facility here. I'm only actually set up to record one-on-one at the minute. You'll understand this because you do podcasting, but it's all to do with upgrading the mixers and the mics and the cameras and stuff like that. But hopefully, any brands listening, once we pick up some more sponsorship, we'll be reinvesting in some more equipment. Because what I want to be able to do is sit down with, myself and 3 other people, and start having some informative type, debates, or speaking to couples, or speaking to brothers, or whatever it might be. I'd like to open up that sort of different format on my platform. So as and when I do, mate, if you guys had the time to do so, it'd be amazing to have you in person in the studio, sit down on the sofa and have a chat with both of you, because I think that the couples conversation, it just gives a really good insight into the dynamic of, what affects you, what you've been through, but then, how it affects a partnership like that. I think it's an interesting conversation to take forwards.
No, absolutely. With the biggest thing with the ADHD is, like, my fiance Hannah, she has done a lot of research, and it's not just about the fact that I've got ADHD, and it's about how your partner, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, kind of sort of copes with that as well. So she's a brilliant
Yeah.
advocate. She's been absolutely brilliant in helping me understand it, and obviously understanding it for herself. So when I do stuff, when I've got half the washing out the washing machine, I've got something in the grill, I'm trying to edit a podcast, I've took something halfway up the stairs and I'm building something in the back garden all at once, she's a bit like, yeah, I can see what's going off here. So she understands it, you know. So that'd be a good, really, really good topic to talk about as well. And she's on the crisis team as well for work. She talks to people after incidents and helps them with dealing with their mental health after they've been to nasty jobs. So again, great topic to coincide.
Mate, it sounds like a conversation that needs to happen in the future, for
Absolutely,
sure.
Bill.
Yeah, well, at this point, though, Chris, I just want to say thank you, mate. Thank you for the work you're doing with your podcast, being one. Thank you for your time tonight. It's been a brilliant conversation. You've had one hell of a life, mate, and it doesn't sound like you're anywhere near stopping. So I think there's a few more adventures to come from you. But yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, mate. So a massive thank you for your time this evening.
No, absolutely, pal. And thank you very much again for having me on. And like I say, keep up the absolute outstanding work you're doing, pal. And hopefully I'll catch up with you soon.
Thank you, mate. I will do. We're just getting started. And for you guys listening, I will put all of Chris's details. So I'll put links to him and his podcast in the description below. So scroll down wherever you are. And in the description of this episode, you will find where you can find Chris and the Old Paratrooper podcast. I stumbled on my words then.
It's a mouthful,
but yeah, Chris, absolute pleasure, mate. Thank you.
Thank you very much.